The massive doors of Lecture Hall 7 slid open with a soft hiss, and hundreds of alien students poured inside like colorful water flowing into a giant bowl. The hall was the biggest room in the entire Galactic Academy, and today it was completely packed with creatures from every corner of the known universe. Professor Vexstar walked slowly to the front of the room, his four purple eyes scanning the crowd of students. His long snake-like neck swayed back and forth as he moved, and his silver scales caught the bright lights from above. The professor was old even by his species' standards, and he had seen many strange things in his long career as a teacher of dangerous biology. The students found their seats quickly. Some had tentacles that wrapped around the chairs, while others floated in the air using their natural gas-filled bodies. The crystal beings from the Andorian system sparkled like diamonds as they settled into their special heat-resistant seats, while the massive rock creatures from the outer rim made the floor shake with each heavy step. Every student carried their learning tablets, which glowed with soft blue light. The tablets were connected directly to their brains through special implants that translated all the different alien languages into thoughts they could understand. This was the only way that beings from so many different worlds could learn together in one place. At the very back of the hall, a small group of students whispered nervously among themselves. These were the Andorian crystal beings, and their bodies were shaking slightly with fear. Their leader was named Christic, and he had been having nightmares ever since he found out about their next assignment. They were going to work with humans on a research mission, and the thought made his crystalline form crack with stress. Professor Vexstar reached the front podium and pressed a button on the control panel. The lights in the hall dimmed, and a massive holographic screen appeared behind him, showing the image of a small blue and green planet floating in the darkness of space. The planet looked peaceful and beautiful, but every student in the hall knew the terrible truth about this world. This was Earth, the most dangerous place in the entire galaxy. The professor cleared his throat, and his voice boomed through the hall using the powerful speaker system. Every word was automatically translated into the native language of each student, so that a tentacle being heard wet slapping sounds, while a crystal creature heard musical chimes, and a gas being felt vibrations in their cloud-like body. Students, this is the most important lesson you will ever attend in your time at this academy, the professor said as he pointed at the image of Earth. What you learn today could mean the difference between life and death. If you ever encounter the creatures that live on this world. The hall became completely silent. Even the usually noisy bubble creatures stopped their constant popping sounds. The image of Earth rotated slowly on the screen, and everyone could see the swirling white clouds and deep blue oceans that hid the terrible secrets beneath. Today we will study the biochemistry of Earth and the impossible beings that call it home, the professor continued. The humans are unlike any other species we have ever discovered. They should not exist according to everything we know about life in the universe, yet somehow they not only survive but thrive in conditions that would kill any other intelligent creature. A student near the front raised three of her arms. The student was from the peaceful garden world, where all creatures lived in harmony with nature, and nothing was ever dangerous or scary. She had never heard of anything that could hurt someone, and the idea frightened her greatly. Professor, she said in a voice like singing birds, what makes these humans so dangerous? Are they very big and strong, like the warriors from the fighting worlds? Professor Vexstar shook his head slowly, making his long neck sway like a tree in the wind. No young flower petal. They are not large or strong. The average human is smaller than most species in this room. What makes them dangerous is something much more terrifying than size or strength. The professor touched another button, and the screen changed to show a complex diagram of molecular structures. The molecules looked like tiny balls connected by glowing lines, but to the trained eyes of the students they represented something far more sinister. These were the building blocks of death itself. The first compound we must discuss, the professor said as he pointed to a particular molecule, is perhaps the most deadly poison known to galactic science. The humans have given it the innocent-sounding name of ethanol, but do not let this fool you. A single drop of this substance can destroy the cellular structure of most known life forms. Gasps and frightened noises filled the hall as students realized what they were looking at. Several of the more sensitive species immediately activated their personal protection shields, while others began backing away from the screen as if the image itself could hurt them. The Zephyrian race dies instantly upon contact. With even the smallest amount, the professor continued for the mighty Brutaxians. Who can survive the explosion of small stars? This compound causes permanent damage to their nervous systems. The liquid beings from the water worlds dissolve completely. When exposed to ethanol, more frightening sounds came from the audience as the full horror of what they were learning began to sink in. The statistics on the screen showed death rates and toxicity levels that were beyond anything they had ever imagined. Even the most dangerous substances from the poison worlds were harmless compared to this earthly compound A student from the deep ocean planet. Raised a trembling tentacle and asked Professor, surely no intelligent species could survive regular contact with such a deadly toxin. How do the humans protect themselves from this terrible poison? Room fell completely silent as everyone waited for the answer. They expected to hear about special protective suits or advanced medical treatments that kept the humans safe from the deadly ethanol that apparently existed on their world. Instead, Professor Vextar's next words sent shockwaves through the entire hall. That, my dear students, is exactly what makes humans the most terrifying species in the known galaxy, he said with a grave expression. They do not protect themselves from ethanol, they actively seek it out. They create it in large quantities. They use it in celebrations and social gatherings. Some humans consume amounts of ethanol that would kill an entire galvanic overlord battle fleet. The silence that followed was so complete that the air recycling system seemed loud in comparison. Several students fainted and crashed to the floor while others began frantically updating their personal safety protocols. The thought of beings who deliberately consumed deadly poison was so alien that their minds could barely process it. But, Professor, how is this possible? Stammered a student from the logic world where everything had to make perfect sense. This goes against all known laws of biology and survival. No species can evolve to drink poison, Professor. Vextar nodded slowly. That is the mystery that has puzzled our greatest scientists for decades. The humans appear to have developed beyond normal biological limitations. They exist in a state that should be impossible according to everything we understand about life. The image on the screen changed again to show more molecular structures, each one representing a different deadly compound found on Earth: caffeine, nicotine, capsaicin, and dozens of other substances that were classified as weapons by most galactic civilizations. Yet somehow humans not only survived exposure to these compounds but seemed to enjoy them. The Andorian students at the back of the hall looked at each other with growing terror. Christek's crystalline body was now cracking so badly that small pieces were falling to the floor. They were supposed to work alongside these impossible beings in just a few months, and now they understood why so many previous research teams had never returned from human space. As the lecture continued and more horrifying facts about Earth's biochemistry were revealed, one thing became clear to every student in the hall: humans were not just another alien species to be studied and understood. They were living proof that the universe contained mysteries far beyond anything they had ever imagined. And somewhere in the depths of space, a human student named Jiho Kim was preparing to travel to the Galactic Academy, completely unaware that his arrival would change everything the galaxy thought it knew about the nature of life itself. 3 weeks had passed since Professor Vextar's terrifying lecture about Earth and its impossible inhabitants. The news had spread through the Galactic Academy like wildfire, and now every student corridor and cafeteria buzzed with nervous whispers about the unthinkable event that was about to happen. A real human was coming to their school. The Academy's administration had gone into complete emergency mode the moment they received confirmation that Jiho Kim would be arriving as part of the student exchange program. Every safety protocol in their massive database had been activated. The corridors now hummed with the sound of extra air filtration systems working at maximum power, while automated cleaning robots sprayed special decontamination chemicals every few minutes. Director Zeflos, a wise old being from the Central Command Worlds, had called at least 12 emergency meetings in the past week. His usually calm blue skin had turned a sickly green color from stress, and his 3 hearts were beating so fast that the medical staff had put him on constant monitoring. The responsibility of keeping thousands of alien students safe from humanity's legendary biochemical dangers, was crushing his normally steady nerve security chief. Graxton had tripled the number of guards stationed throughout the academy. His massive warrior frame paced the halls like a caged predator as he supervised the installation of emergency containment fields and medical stations every entrance to. The school now had hazardous material scanners that could detect even the smallest traces of Earth-based toxins. The medical bay had been completely transformed into something resembling a military field hospital. Dr. Healer Soft Touch from the Caring Worlds had requisitioned every known antidote and treatment for toxic exposure from across the galaxy, though she privately doubted that any of their medicines would be effective against the legendary poisons that humans carried in their bodies. She was determined to try her best to save lives. When the inevitable disaster occurred, students throughout the academy had been given special emergency communication devices that would instantly alert medical teams if they experienced any symptoms of poisoning. Many species have requested temporary transfers to other educational facilities, while the more paranoid ones had simply packed their belongings and returned home rather than risk exposure to whatever deadly substances the human might bring. The tentacle beings from the ocean worlds had sealed themselves in their water-filled dormitories and refused to come out until the human left. The crystal creatures had activated their emergency defense modes, which made them glow with protective energy fields. The gas beings had compressed themselves into the smallest possible forms and hidden in the air vents. But nowhere was the panic more intense than among the Andorian students, who knew they would soon be working directly with humans on their research mission. Christic had not slept in weeks, and his crystalline body was now covered in stress fractures that made him look like a broken mirror. His friends tried to comfort him, but they were just as terrified as he was. Every day brought new rumors and horror stories about what the human might do. Some students whispered that humans could breathe deadly gases that would kill anyone nearby. Others claimed that human skin secreted toxic oils that could dissolve metal. Others insisted that humans had to consume poison several times per day just to survive, and that they would probably try to share their deadly food with unsuspecting aliens. The rumors grew more ridiculous and terrifying with each telling, until some students believed that humans were actually living weapons created by some ancient enemy civilization to destroy all other forms of life. The fact that humans looked relatively normal in the few pictures that existed only made them more frightening, because it meant they were perfectly designed to appear harmless while carrying out their biochemical attacks. On the morning that Jiho Kim was scheduled to arrive, Director Zeflos stood in the main hangar bay, surrounded by medical teams, security forces, and emergency response units. The hangar had been cleared of all non-essential personnel and sealed off from the rest of the Academy. Special atmospheric processors worked constantly to ensure that any toxic substances would be immediately neutralized. The transport ship from Earth appeared as a tiny dot in the star-filled sky, slowly growing larger as it approached the Academy. The ship itself looked surprisingly ordinary, which only increased everyone's anxiety. If humans were willing to travel in normal spacecraft without special protective gear, then they must be even more dangerous than anyone had imagined. As the ship landed with a soft thud on the hangar deck, emergency scanners immediately began analyzing its hull for traces of deadly compounds. The readings that came back made several technicians faint. The ship's exterior showed traces of hundreds of different substances that registered as weapons-grade toxins on their equipment. Director Zeflos activated his personal protection field and stepped forward as the ship's airlock began to cycle open. Medical teams raised their scanning equipment while security forces powered up their containment beams. Everyone held their breath as they prepared to see humanity's legendary toxin immunity in action. The airlock door slid open with a soft hiss, and Jiho Kim stepped out into the hangar. The first thing that surprised everyone was how completely normal he looked by human standards. Jiho was an ordinary college student wearing simple clothes and carrying a basic backpack. His black hair was neatly combed, and his brown eyes looked around curiously at all the assembled aliens. He smiled and waved in what appeared to be a friendly greeting, but to the aliens surrounding him, Jiho looked like death incarnate, walking casually among them. Their scanners were screaming warnings about the toxic compounds they detected in his breath. his skin, and especially in the mysterious backpack he carried. The fact that he seemed completely unaware of the deadly danger he posed to everyone around him only made him more terrifying. "Hello, everyone," Jiho said cheerfully as he stepped down from his ship. "I am Jiho Kim from Seoul National University. Thank you for having me here at your academy. I am very excited to learn about xenobiology and meet students from other worlds." His friendly words were automatically translated by everyone's implants, but the casual tone in which he spoke while carrying enough toxic substances to wipe out a small space station sent chills through the assembled crowd. Several aliens immediately activated emergency evacuation protocols, while others began backing slowly toward the exit's director. Zephylos forced himself to step forward, though every instinct in his ancient body screamed at him to run. "Welcome to our academy, student Kim," he managed to say through his trembling voice. "We have prepared special accommodations for your stay to ensure the safety and comfort of all our students." Jiho nodded enthusiastically. "That sounds great," he said, completely missing the terrified expressions on everyone's faces. "I brought some things from home to share with my new classmates." My mother packed some of her special homemade snacks and drinks. She wanted to make sure I would not get homesick. The mention of food and drinks from the death world of Earth caused several more aliens to faint, while others began frantically calling for additional medical support. The idea that humans would willingly share their toxic substances with innocent aliens was so horrifying that some species translators crashed trying to process the concept. As Jiho was escorted through the academy corridors toward his specially prepared containment quarters, students pressed themselves against the walls and activated every protective device. They had many covered their breathing apparatus or sealed their environmental suits, while others simply fled to their dormitories and locked the doors. The crystal beings dimmed their natural light and tried to make themselves invisible. The tentacle creatures pulled all their appendages close to their bodies, while the gas beings compressed themselves into the smallest possible space. Even the mighty rock people from the heavy gravity worlds moved aside to let the human pass. Jiho walked through this gauntlet of terror with a confused but friendly expression on his face. He could not understand why everyone seemed so afraid of him, but he assumed it was just normal nervousness around meeting someone from a different world. He had experienced similar reactions when he first started studying alien languages back on Earth. What Jiho did not realize was that his mere presence had already begun to change everything the galaxy thought it knew about the nature of life itself. By simply existing and acting like a normal person, while carrying substances that should have killed him instantly, he was proving that the universe contained mysteries far beyond anything the greatest alien scientists had ever imagined. As he settled into his heavily monitored quarters with medical teams standing by and emergency protocols active throughout the academy, one thing was certain. The next few days would either result in the greatest scientific breakthrough in galactic history or the most catastrophic disaster the Galactic Academy had ever seen. And Jiho Kim, completely unaware of the panic his arrival had caused, unpacked his backpack and began preparing for what he hoped would be an exciting first day of classes. The morning of Jiho Kim's first xenobiology class arrived with an atmosphere of dread that seemed to hang over the entire Galactic Academy like a toxic cloud. Students who normally filled the corridors with cheerful chatter now whispered in hushed tones while staying as far apart as possible. Many had activated their personal emergency beacons just in case they needed to call for help. Professor Vexstar had spent the entire night preparing for what he knew would be either the most important scientific demonstration of his career or his final lecture before a catastrophic disaster. His 4 eyes were bloodshot from lack of sleep, and his usually pristine silver scales looked dull and lifeless. The weight of responsibility for keeping his students alive while conducting groundbreaking research was almost more than his ancient mind could bear. The lecture hall had been transformed into something resembling a military command center rather than a place of learning. Emergency containment fields hummed with energy around every seat while medical teams positioned themselves at strategic points throughout the room. Automated systems constantly monitored air quality, temperature, and radiation levels, while emergency evacuation routes were clearly marked with glowing signs. Special atmospheric processors worked overtime to ensure that any dangerous substances would be immediately neutralized. while backup life support systems stood ready to take over if the main systems failed. The Academy's best engineers had worked through the night to install additional safety measures, including emergency force fields that could isolate any section of the room in milliseconds. Ho arrived at the lecture hall wearing the same casual clothes he had worn the day before, completely unaware that his simple backpack was being tracked by 17 different scanning systems. The sensors detected trace amounts of substances that their computers could not even classify properly. The readings were so far beyond normal toxicity scales that several monitoring devices had simply shut down rather than try to process the impossible data as Ji-ho entered the room and took his assigned seat in the specially prepared containment area. Every other student in the hall activated their maximum protection protocols. The crystal beings glowed brightly with defensive energy while the gas creatures compressed themselves into tiny dense balls. The tentacle species wrapped all their appendages tightly around their bodies while the rock people activated their hardest. Mineral Shelskristek and his fellow Andorian students watched from the back of the hall through multiple layers of emergency shielding. Their crystalline bodies were vibrating with fear so intensely that they were creating a high-pitched whining sound that made several other species uncomfortable. The knowledge that they would soon be working directly with this impossible being made their stress fractures spread across their entire forms. Professor Vextar moved carefully to his position behind the reinforced podium, his movements slow and deliberate, like someone approaching a dangerous wild animal. Today, students, he announced, his voice amplified by the speakers, we have the unprecedented opportunity to observe a human in our learning environment. The professor gestured toward Ji-ho, who waved politely at his classmates, completely missing the way they all flinched away from his friendly gesture. Student Kim has agreed to participate in our studies, though I must stress that everyone should maintain maximum safe distance and follow all emergency procedures. With trembling hands, Professor Vextar activated the containment system around a small vial of clear liquid. The vial was sealed inside multiple layers of energy fields, each one designed to contain substances that could destroy entire space stations. The warning lights around the container blinked like angry red eyes while automated voices continuously announced danger warnings in dozens of different alien languages. This sample contains ethanol at a concentration of 40%, the professor announced, watching as several students immediately activated their emergency evacuation procedures. For 97% of known species, exposure to this substance would result in immediate death. For most others, it would cause permanent cellular damage and organ failure. The vial sat in its energy prison like a weapon of mass destruction waiting to be unleashed. Even the most hardened warrior species in the class leaned back in their seats and powered up additional defensive systems. The idea that they were in the same room as such a deadly substance was almost more than their survival instincts could handle. Ji-ho watched the elaborate safety precautions with growing confusion. He could see that the liquid in the vial was clear and looked exactly like water, but the way everyone was reacting, you would think it was liquid death itself. His confusion grew as Professor Vextar began displaying horrific images of the damage that ethanol could cause to alien biology. The toxin attacks cellular membranes at the molecular level. The professor continued, pointing to disturbing pictures of tissue breakdown. Even minimal exposure causes immediate organ failure in most species. The Galactic Health Organization has classified it as a Category 5 biohazard, requiring the highest level of containment protocols. A student from the silicon-based Zereth collective managed to form enough courage to raise a crystalline appendage. Professor, how do humans function while carrying such deadly substances in their bodies? Surely they must have evolved some form of complete immunity to these toxins. Professor Vextar nodded gravely. Excellent question. The mechanism behind human toxin resistance remains one of the greatest mysteries in xenobiology. Some theories suggest they have developed symbiotic relationships with the toxic compounds, while others propose that humans are no longer purely organic life forms. The discussion continued with increasingly wild theories about how humans might have survived exposure to such deadly substances. Some suggested that humans were actually synthetic beings created by an advanced civilization. Others proposed that they existed in a different dimension, Where the normal laws of chemistry did not apply, Jiho listened to these explanations with growing amusement. He was beginning to understand that there had been some kind of massive misunderstanding about humans and their relationship with alcohol. The elaborate safety precautions and terrified reactions of his classmates were starting to make sense, though. They still seemed completely over the top as Professor Vexstar launched into a detailed explanation of the various ways that ethanol could kill different alien species. Jiho found himself struggling not to laugh. The whole situation was becoming absurd, and he was starting to feel bad for his classmates who were clearly genuinely terrified. Finally, when the professor began discussing emergency medical procedures for ethanol poisoning, Jiho decided he needed to speak up. The misunderstanding was getting out of hand, and he did not want his new classmates to spend the entire semester living in fear of something that was completely harmless. Actually, Professor Jiho said, raising his hand politely, I think there might be some confusion. Here the words hit the lecture hall like a photon torpedo blast. Several students immediately triggered their emergency beacons while others began activating evacuation protocols. The idea that the human was about to correct their professor's warnings about deadly toxins suggested that the situation was even more dangerous than they had imagined. Professor Vexstar's four eyes focused on Jiho with a mixture of scientific fascination and absolute terror. Student Kim, he managed to say, his voice barely above a whisper, please explain what you mean, but I must insist you remain within the containment field. The entire hall held its breath as they waited for the human to reveal some even more horrifying truth about his species' relationship with the galaxy's most dangerous substances. None of them were prepared for what Jiho was about to tell them. That stuff in the bottle, Jiho said, pointing casually at the heavily contained vial of ethanol. We just call it alcohol. We drink it at parties. The silence that followed was so complete that the emergency life support system sounded loud in comparison. What the human had just said was so impossible that most of the students' translation systems crashed trying to process it. The concept of voluntarily consuming deadly poison for entertainment was so alien that their minds simply could not accept it. 3 students immediately lost consciousness and crashed to the floor, while several others began experiencing what appeared to be system failures. Emergency medical teams rushed to assist them while the remaining students stared at Jiho in complete shock and horror. The human had just casually announced that his entire species regularly consumed Category 5 biohazards for fun, and he had done it with the same tone someone might use to discuss the weather. The implications were so terrifying that several species' survival instincts simply shut down rather than try to cope with the impossible reality. And Jiho, still completely unaware of the psychological trauma he was causing, simply sat in his containment area waiting for the class to continue, wondering why everyone seemed so upset about something as ordinary as alcohol. The lecture hall had become a scene of pure chaos as the full impact of Jiho's words began to sink into the minds of the alien students. Emergency medical teams rushed between the fallen students while others worked frantically to stabilize classmates who had gone into shock from the impossible revelation they had just heard. Professor Vexstar stood frozen behind his podium, his 4 eyes wide with disbelief, and his translator implant smoking from the strain of trying to process what the human had just said. The concept that an entire species would voluntarily consume deadly poison for entertainment was so far beyond his understanding that his ancient mind was struggling to accept the reality. The automated emergency systems throughout the hall were going haywire as they detected the stress responses from hundreds of different species at once. Alarm bells rang constantly while warning lights flashed in patterns that hurt to look at. The air itself seemed to vibrate with the collective terror and confusion of beings whose entire understanding of biology had just been shattered. Jiho remained in his containment area, looking around at the chaos with growing concern. He was beginning to realize that his casual comment about drinking alcohol had somehow caused a major incident, though he still did not understand why everyone was reacting so strongly to something that seemed perfectly normal to him. Student Kim, Professor Vexstar finally managed to speak, his voice cracking with strain. Please elaborate on your previous statement, but for the safety of everyone present, I must ask that you explain very carefully what you mean when you say humans drink this substance. The professor's request caused another wave of panic, too. Sweep through the remaining conscious students, the idea that they were about to hear more details about humanity's impossible toxin consumption. Habits was almost more than their sanity could handle. Several more students activated their emergency evacuation protocols while others began sending final messages to their homeworlds. Ho looked at the terrified faces around him and tried to think of a way to explain something that seemed so obvious that clear liquid in the container looked exactly like soju, which his grandfather made at home. It was the same stuff his parents drank during celebrations and that college students consumed at parties. Every weekend, well, Jiho said slowly, trying to be as clear as possible, it is just alcohol. Like beer and wine and soju, we drink it when we want to relax or celebrate something. My parents have some with dinner sometimes, and my grandfather makes his own rice wine in big ceramic jars each. Word hit the assembled aliens like individual hammer blows. The human was describing a civilization that not only consumed deadly poison on a regular basis, but actually enjoyed it and made it themselves as a hobby. The concept was so alien that several students' minds simply refused to process it. Any further, a gaseous being from the nebula colonies managed to form enough coherent matter to speak through their translator. Drink the poison for relaxation, the being asked in a voice like wind through empty space. Celebrate with toxins that cause cellular death. How is your entire species not extinct? Jiho shrugged in the universal gesture, for I do not know, which only made the situation worse. The casual way he dismissed their concerns about species extinction suggested that humans existed so far beyond normal biological limitations that they did not even think about survival anymore. I guess we just got used to it over time, Jiho replied. It is not really poison to us, it just makes us feel happy and relaxed. My grandmother says a little bit of wine is good for your heart and helps you live longer. The mention of alcohol being used as medicine sent another shockwave through the hall. The idea that humans use Category 5 biohazards as health supplements was so impossible that it broke several more translation systems. Professor Vexstar had to grab the podium to keep from falling over as his legs went weak. But student Kim, the professor, whispered, how do you survive? The molecular structure of ethanol should destroy your cellular membranes, your organs should dissolve, your nervous system should shut down completely. Ho thought about this for a moment, trying to remember his high school biology classes. I think our livers process it or something, he said uncertainly. We have enzymes that break it down. My biology teacher explained it once, but I was not paying much attention. Most people can drink quite a bit before they get really sick. The casual mention of humans having special biological systems designed specifically to process deadly toxins was the final straw for many students. The rock beings from the heavy gravity worlds began making sounds like mountains falling apart, while the crystal creatures started shattering from stress overload. Kristek and his fellow Andorian students watched from behind their emergency shields as their worst nightmares came true. They were learning that humans were not just immune to toxins, but had actually evolved biological systems to enjoy consuming them. The research mission they were supposed to join was starting to look less like a scientific expedition and more like a suicide mission. A tentacle being from the deep ocean worlds managed to speak through its terror. Student Kim, are you saying that humans have evolved specifically to consume substances that kill other species, that you have biological systems designed for processing toxins? Ho nodded enthusiastically, finally feeling like someone was starting to understand. Yeah, exactly, we can handle alcohol pretty well, though. Some people are better at it than others. My friend Min can drink way more than I can before he gets dizzy, but my friend Sue gets sick after just one beer. The revelation that humans had individual variations in their toxin processing abilities suggested that they had been consuming these substances for so long that they had developed specialized genetic differences. The implications for human evolution and biology were staggering and terrifying. Professor Vexstar realized that everything the galaxy knew about the limits of organic life would have to be completely rewritten. The human sitting casually in his containment area represented a level of biological adaptation that should have been impossible according to every scientific principle. They understood student Kim. The professor said, his voice barely audible. How long has your species been consuming these substances? How did you develop such impossible biological capabilities? Jeho scratched his head thinking. Oh, probably thousands of years. My history teacher said ancient humans were making wine and beer before they invented writing. We have archaeological evidence of alcohol production from like 7,000 years ago, maybe longer the timescale involved. Sent the remaining aliens into complete despair, the humans had been voluntarily consuming deadly poison for millennia, and had not only survived, but thrived and developed advanced civilization. The concept challenged everything they thought they knew about intelligence, evolution, and survival, as word of the revelation spread throughout the Academy via emergency communication channels. The entire galactic scientific community began to realize that they were facing a discovery that would change their understanding of life itself. The humans were not just another alien species to be studied, they were living proof that the universe contained possibilities beyond imagination. Director Zeflos received the reports from the lecture hall and immediately began preparing emergency communications to every major government in the galaxy. The discovery that humans routinely consumed Category 5 biohazards as recreational beverages would require a complete reassessment of everything they thought they knew about the nature of life. And in the lecture hall, Jiho continued to answer questions about human drinking habits, completely unaware that he was single-handedly revolutionizing galactic science with every casual comment about weekend parties and family celebrations. The revelation was complete. Humans did not just survive exposure to deadly toxins, they had evolved to enjoy them and had built their entire social structure around consuming substances that could kill any other known species. It was impossible yet undeniably true. The galaxy would never be the same. Despite every safety protocol, screaming against it and against the frantic protests from the Academy's Safety Committee, Professor Vexstar found himself facing the most important decision of his long scientific career. Never before in galactic history had there been an opportunity to witness human toxin resistance in real time. The chance to observe the impossible was simply too valuable to pass up. The lecture hall was evacuated of all non-essential personnel, leaving only the most dedicated scientists and researchers, along with emergency medical teams positioned at every exit. Heavy-duty containment fields powered up to maximum strength while the Academy's Emergency Response Center went to full alert status. Every major government in the galaxy had been notified that they were about to attempt the most dangerous scientific demonstration ever recorded. Director Zeflos stood in the Academy's command center, watching dozens of monitors that showed vital signs, atmospheric readings, and emergency status reports from throughout the facility. His 3 hearts were beating so fast that medical staff had attached monitoring devices to prevent cardiac failure. The responsibility of authorizing what could be the most catastrophic disaster in galactic history was almost too much to bearing. The lecture hall, Jiho reached into his backpack, completely unaware that his simple action was being monitored by sensors sensitive enough to detect individual molecules. The security scanners immediately identified dozens of compounds that registered as weapons-grade biological hazards, while automated systems began calculating blast radius estimates for the expected explosion. What Jiho pulled out of his backpack was a small thermal container that looked completely innocent to human eyes but appeared to the alien monitoring systems like a containment device for the most dangerous substances known to science. The readings were so far beyond normal toxicity levels that several computers crashed rather than try to process the impossible data. I brought some coffee from home, Jiho announced cheerfully, holding up the container. My mother made it special for my first day at the Academy. She wanted me to have something familiar while I was so far from home. The word coffee sent ripples of terror through the remaining observers. This was another legendary Earth poison, one that had been responsible for several diplomatic incidents when humans had offered it to unsuspecting alien visitors. The combination of caffeine and other alkaloids found in coffee was considered so deadly that most species emergency protocols listed it as a biological weapon. Professor Vexstar's hands shook as he adjusted the recording equipment. If they were about to witness the death of a human, at least galactic science would benefit from studying the exact process. The data they collected could potentially save lives if other species ever encountered these substances. The Andorian students, led by Christic, watched through multiple layers of protective shielding from the safest Possible distance, their crystalline bodies were fracturing so badly from stress that they looked like broken mirrors reflecting emergency lights. The knowledge that they would soon be working alongside beings who treated lethal toxins as casual refreshments was destroying their sanity. Other students throughout the academy watched via remote monitoring systems from the safety of their sealed dormitories. Many had already begun composing final messages to their families, convinced that they were about to witness an event that would contaminate the entire facility. Ji-ho unscrewed the cap of his thermal container, releasing aromatic vapors that caused every air purification system in the facility to begin screaming warnings. The smell alone registered as a biological attack on 17 different sensor types, while atmospheric analyzers detected compounds that should not exist in nature. The scent of coffee filled the air and reached the aliens' various sensory organs, causing reactions of pure terror. The tentacle beings sealed all their breathing apertures while the gas creatures compressed themselves into the smallest possible forms. Crystal beings dimmed their natural light to minimum levels, while rock people activated their hardest defensive mineral shells. Student Kim, Professor Vexstar managed to whisper, his voice barely audible over the sound of emergency alarms. Please proceed with extreme caution. The medical teams are standing by, but I must warn you that our treatments may not be effective against the toxins you are about to consume. Ji-ho looked around at the elaborate emergency preparations with growing confusion. Everyone seemed to think that drinking coffee was incredibly dangerous when it was just something he did every morning. The terror on his classmates' faces was starting to make him feel bad for causing such a panic. It is just coffee, Ji-ho said, trying to reassure everyone. My mom added a little bit of her homemade plum wine to make it taste better. She says it helps with concentration during exams. The mention of multiple toxins being combined together sent several more students into unconsciousness, while others began activating personal evacuation pods. The idea that humans mixed different deadly substances together for flavor enhancement was beyond anything their minds could process. Emergency medical teams raised their equipment to maximum sensitivity, preparing to document the exact moment of cellular breakdown, while xenobiology experts from across the galaxy watched through remote connections, hoping to understand how human physiology could possibly handle such abuse without any apparent concern for the deadly nature of what he was doing. Ji-ho lifted the thermal container to his lips. The movement seemed to happen in slow motion as hundreds of sensors tracked every microscopic change in his vital signs, atmospheric composition, and molecular structure. The moment the liquid touched Ji-ho's lips, every monitoring system in the facility registered readings that should have been impossible. According to everything galactic science understood about biochemistry, the human should have been dead before the toxins reached his stomach, yet somehow his vital signs remained perfectly normal. Ji-ho took a long, satisfied drink of his mother's special coffee, completely unaware that he had just performed what the entire galaxy considered to be an act of biological impossibility. The liquid contained enough caffeine to kill a galvanic battle cruiser crew and enough ethanol to dissolve a crystalline palace, yet it seemed to have no effect on him whatsoever. That is really good, Ji-ho said with genuine pleasure as he lowered the container. My mom makes the best coffee. She grows her own beans in our garden, and the plum wine she adds comes from my grandfather's special recipe. He has been making it for 40 years, the casual way. The human discussed consuming multiple Category 5 biohazards as if they were ordinary refreshments was perhaps more terrifying than watching him actually drink them. The implications were staggering. Not only were humans immune to deadly toxins, but they had developed entire cultural traditions around consuming them. Professor Vexstar stared at his monitoring equipment in complete disbelief. Every sensor showed that Ji-ho was not only alive but actually healthier than before drinking the toxic mixture. His heart rate had improved, his brain activity was more focused, and his cellular regeneration had actually increased. The readings were so impossible that the professor began checking his equipment for malfunctions. Nothing in his decades of experience had prepared him for data that contradicted every known law of biology. The human was thriving on substances that should have killed him instantly. Student Kim, the professor managed to ask, his voice filled with awe, how do you feel? Are you experiencing any discomfort or unusual sensations? Ji-ho smiled and took another sip. I feel great, actually. The coffee is helping me wake up, and the plum wine gives it a nice sweet flavor. My mom always knows exactly what I need would. Anyone else like to try some? The offer to share the deadly substances with innocent aliens caused a complete evacuation of the remaining observers. Security systems automatically sealed the lecture hall while emergency protocols activated throughout. The academy, the idea that the human might try to poison his classmates was too horrible to contemplate, but Ji-ho remained in his containment area happily, drinking his mother's coffee, completely unaware that he had just shattered every assumption the galaxy had ever made about the limits of life itself. His casual consumption of multiple lethal toxins would go down in history as the moment when galactic science realized that the universe contained mysteries far beyond their understanding. The demonstration was complete, and the impossible had been proven. The humans were not just immune to deadly substances, they actually enjoyed them and had built their entire culture around sharing these toxins with friends and family. The galaxy would never be the same, and Ji-ho Kim had accomplished it all with nothing more than a cup of his mother's special coffee. Ji-ho lowered his thermal container with a contented sigh and smiled at the assembled aliens, who were still staring at him through layers of emergency shielding. The coffee had been perfect, just the way his mother made it, with the right balance of bitter and sweet that helped him focus during long study sessions. He was completely unaware that he had just performed what every advanced civilization in the galaxy considered to be impossible. That was exactly what I needed, Ji-ho said cheerfully. As he screwed the cap back onto his container, my mom always says that a good cup of coffee can solve any problem. She was right as usual. I feel much more awake and ready to learn now. The casual way the human discussed his consumption of multiple lethal toxins sent shock waves through the monitoring stations throughout the academy. Scientists from dozens of worlds watched their instruments in complete disbelief as Ji-ho's vital signs showed not just survival but actual improvement. After consuming substances that should have destroyed his cellular structure, Professor Vextar stood frozen behind his reinforced podium, trying to process what he had just witnessed. His 4 eyes blinked rapidly as he stared at readings that contradicted everything he had learned in his centuries of studying dangerous biology. The human had not only survived consuming Category 5 biohazards, but seemed energized and healthier than before. In the Academy's command center, Director Zephylos watched dozens of monitors showing impossible data streams from the demonstration. His 3 hearts had finally slowed to a more normal rhythm as it became clear that the human was not going to explode or dissolve or cause any of the catastrophic disasters they had prepared for. Instead, they were witnessing something far more unsettling: the complete overthrow of established scientific law. The implications began to sink in slowly, like water seeping through stone. The humans were not biochemical weapons, or genetically modified super soldiers, or synthetic beings created by advanced aliens. They were simply ordinary creatures who happened to exist in a universe with completely different rules than anyone had imagined. Emergency response teams throughout the galaxy received reports that contradicted everything in their training manuals. The human had consumed enough toxins to wipe out a small army and had responded by commenting on the flavor and asking if anyone wanted to share. The concept was so alien that most emergency protocols had no procedures for dealing with it. Christek and his fellow Andorian students watched from their heavily shielded observation area as their understanding of reality crumbled around them. They had spent weeks preparing for a research mission that they expected would result in their deaths from toxic exposure. Now they realized that working with humans would be challenging for completely different reasons. The humans existed in a reality where the impossible was mundane, where substances that could destroy starships were used as social beverages, where deadly toxins were family recipes passed down through generations. The research mission would not be dangerous because of human biochemistry, but because humans lived in a universe that operated by rules no one else understood. Word of the demonstration spread through galactic communication networks faster than light itself. Scientists, philosophers, and government leaders across thousands of worlds struggled to understand the implications of what had just occurred. The humans had proven that life could exist in forms that contradicted every assumption about biology, chemistry, and survival on the water worlds of the Oceanic Alliance. Emergency Sessions were called to discuss whether their fundamental understanding of toxicology needed to be completely rewritten. The Crystal Confederacy began massive research projects to understand how organic life could develop such impossible capabilities. Even the ancient machine intelligences found their logic circuits overloading as they tried to process the contradiction between theory and observed reality, but perhaps nowhere was the impact greater than in the field of medicine. Dr. Healer, soft touch from the caring world, stared at her medical scanners in wonder as she realized that everything she thought she knew about treating toxic exposure might be wrong. If humans could not only survive but thrive on substances that killed other species, then perhaps the entire concept of universal toxicity was flawed. Student Kim, Professor Vextar, finally managed to speak, though his voice was filled with awe rather than terror. Could you help us understand how your species developed this incredible ability to process these substances? Shi-Ho thought about the question while taking another sip of his coffee. I'm not really sure, he admitted. My biology classes never went into much detail about it. I think humans have been drinking alcohol and coffee for thousands of years, so maybe we just adapted over time. My grandmother says that humans can get used to almost anything if they try long enough.